Welcome to the summer session at York University and specifically to NATS 1780, Weather and Climate. In this overview presentation, I want to just introduce you to the course, give you a little bit of a sense as to what you can expect, and hopefully orient you to how the course will actually be conducted this summer. So let's get right into it. A little bit about me. My name is Ian Lum. You can reach me via email. I do like to hear from you. However, it's actually more effective most of the time to post queries via one of the Moodle forums, and I'll tell you more about the Moodle forums. Actually, let's go ahead and just have a look at that right now because I think it's worth drawing in. So here we go. Here's Moodle, and Moodle should look something like this to you once you've logged in. So you just go to moodle.yorku.ca. You have to sign in with your Passport York credentials, and then you should see the courses that are currently active for you. You should have one that looks something like this: Summer 2018-19, Weather and Climate. And then if you click on that, you should see something like this. So there's not a lot here right now, but I can assure you that the Moodle site for the course will start to fill out pretty significantly. And I think what I better do is just turn off notifications for now, because otherwise that's just going to be completely distracting. All right. So I just mentioned the idea of a Moodle forum. The only one that exists right now is called the Other Forum, and it's designed to have you engage in discussions with me and possibly the teaching assistants on anything to do with the course other than labs or assignments. There will be labs and assignments forum, a lab and an assignment forum added shortly. So if you click on this, you'll see there's already some content here, some excellent questions, course format and date, which is something I'm hoping I can add some color to through this presentation today, and then a question about textbooks and so on. So this is a perfect place, a perfect venue to ask questions like this. So if the matter is not of a private nature, in other words, to do with grades or an accommodation or something like that, then I will ask you to please post your questions via Moodle. I've worked quite hard to keep the course's Moodle site up to date and to answer your questions in a timely fashion. I'm pretty sure you can count on me to be online every day throughout the entire summer. That'll probably even include weekends, perhaps a little bit more sporadically over long weekends. But, I think you'll find that I'm pretty responsive via Moodle. And then if there is a need for office hours, we can make separate arrangements for that, and they'll also be conducted online. There's a detailed description for the course you'll find in the course outline, and in fact, the course outline is one of the most important elements that I'm trying to introduce to you through this session here. So if we go back to our course, and if we have a look at the course's Moodle site again, you can see that the course outline is indeed available to you. Now it does actually say draft, and I need to change that because I actually just updated the course outline today, and that is now getting to be pretty much final content. So I will make that change. All right. So that's the course outline. And in fact, much of the content that I'm going through today in this overview lecture is available in detail from the course outline. So I expect you know something about the description for the course as you're here. It's intended to fill the Gen Ed requirement. It's not intended for science majors. It's intended for those whose lives may less, from a more perhaps peripheral perspective, touch on the science and that is behind weather and climate. And honestly, I probably say this every time I start teaching this course. There's probably never been a more critical time, and I'll come back to that, I'm sure, in various ways. The content for the course will be based upon lectures that were captured in the fall term 2018 and the winter term 2019. I've already made the introduction and the Earth and its atmosphere content available to you. And again, I'm going to show you where that is. So if we go back over here to the course's Moodle site, if you have a look, there's a whole section called Lecture Captures. When you click on that, you get the expanded view, and each of these is basically its own web page. The format for the web pages will always be the same. I'll share slides with you. So these are the slides for the introductory material. This is based on content provided by the publisher of the textbook. This is all aligned with the second edition of the textbook available from Nelson. I'll tell you more about the textbook momentarily. So you get your slides, you get the lecture captures, which are available here. It looks like I messed up the link there, so I'm going to have to fix that. Otherwise, nobody will be able to see this. And basically, once you start playing this, you'll be able to see.
Since the outset, communicability. So
you'll get all this stuff here. Okay. So those are the captures. Sometimes the captures will be made available via YouTube, as this one will be. And then I'll also refer you to readings. You can see I've already got the reading here for the second edition of the textbook, and I need to add in the relevant readings for the first edition of the textbook. So our plan is to cover the same topics that were covered in the fall term and the winter term that have just passed. The emphasis that we place on these topics from the perspective of labs and assignments in the exam will reflect a slightly more unique perspective that will be more tightly integrated with what's happening this summer. So for example, currently one of the topics that's very relevant and very related is the topic of flooding. There's a lot of flooding going on in parts of the world, and definitely here at home in Canada, and in particular in places like Montreal, parts of Quebec, including the areas not too far from Montreal, cottage country just north of the where the university is in the Toronto area, so on and so forth. So we'll be spending some time looking at flooding on the first lab. More about that shortly. So you can see this is essentially the list of topics for the course. Now, of course, here's the continuation of that list. So what you can see is we start off with foundational topics where we discuss fundamentals such as energy, temperature, humidity, condensation, and so on. Start getting into more interesting topics such as clouds and precipitation, and then build towards understanding air in motion and weather systems, building right up to severe kinds of weather such as thunderstorms, tornadoes, hurricanes, that kind of thing. Along the way, learning about air masses and fronts. We'll also be talking about climate, and I'll try and start throwing in elements of climate right from the outset. Now, of course, this is the way things were done in the fall and winter term 2019. And you can see there's quite a lot of material here. And that's one of the most challenging aspects of this summer course. The fact that this course runs at double speed. It's a 6-credit course that is designed to be delivered within the constraints of the SU19 term. And so that's basically not really April. We've got, a day or two of April. That's all. May, June, July. By the end of July, the course is finished. So it's essentially a 3-month time frame. So and then of course we've got the week of exams and a reading week thrown in there as well. But it's a very accelerated time frame. To be completely blunt and completely direct and completely honest, you probably, depending upon your learning style and your level of comfort with some of the things that we'll speak about, you're probably looking at dedicating something like 3 to perhaps 6 hours to the course on essentially a weekly basis to keep pace. And that'll be in addition to me giving you of order, uh, 3 to 6 hours worth of lectures per week, because the course does run at this double speed time frame. So this is probably the most challenging aspect of the course, the fact that it does run at this very accelerated speed. I'm sharing this with you considerably less to instill any kind of a sense of stress or fear or anything like that, just to place things on a much more realistic footing. In the fall winter, we start in September, we have exams in December, we then reconvene in January and go through with exams in April. So you've got more on the order of about 8 months, roughly speaking. I suppose the term, if you look at just the terms, it's more like, you know, um, 6 months worth of pure term work. In the summer, we've literally got half that, right? We've got 3 full months: July, May, June, July. So it does move at a very accelerated pace, and that is the way that it's designed. And so please be aware of that. And of course, it's critical to keep pace with things, because I have to set deadlines for the term work to keep us on track. So, in terms of learning outcomes for the course, so the idea of outcomes is, what's going to be the result as a consequence of taking the course. Um, it's not too surprising. What we're trying to do is enhance your level of scientific literacy. And as you can see from this slide, it's literacy that's informed by the inclusion of quantitative elements. And I'll say more about this momentarily. So obviously we want you to understand, to have a better appreciation for weather and climate from a perspective that emphasizes a scientific angle as opposed to other angles. And I'm sure you can appreciate that when it comes to both weather and climate, there are numerous other perspectives from which these topics can be and are approached. So we will be addressing this using the scientific method and emphasizing scientific elements. So please keep that in mind when you're working on the course, because that is essentially a guiding principle. And so it will emphasize, as I say, both quantitative as well as qualitative elements, and a little bit more on the quantitative stuff shortly. There are various skills that will be assisting you in developing to help you to be successful in completing the course. Quite often these are problem-solving skills, and this allows us to really tap into the course, the topics of weather and climate from a much more informed scientific perspective. One of the very interesting ways that geoscience courses like this really differ from many other types of courses that you might be taking at the university, or other courses, other areas that you might be exposed to. They differ in the framing in four very different ways, and you can see them listed at the bottom of this slide here: time, space, data, and systems. So when we speak about time, we're going to be having a much more fluid perspective on time. We're going to be sometimes looking at time running backwards, where we'll be thinking about the atmosphere in the context of the broader Earth system at different times, perhaps in the past and perhaps even in the future. You can appreciate how that might fit into such things as trying to develop scenarios for future climates and that sort of thing. So time is much more fluid than you might be accustomed to in your everyday pursuit of life. Space or the spatial element is another element that is pretty interesting. Quite often we'll emphasize thinking in multiple dimensions. So um, if you think about it, one dimension is that of a line. Then if we amplify that up to two dimensions, we're thinking about planes. And three dimensions, you can think about something like a cube, a volume, as a reference for framing things in three dimensions. Quite often, it's necessary to look at weather and climate from from perspectives that consider all three dimensions and even time. In fact, in many ways, time kind of comes in as essentially a fourth dimension. So even to understand something like a thunderstorm or a hurricane, it'll be quite, and in fact, even to understand much simpler systems in the atmosphere, it'll be very useful. At times, it'll be essential to think about these these systems in terms of multiple dimensions, of three spatial dimensions plus the single temporal dimension. And as I say, that's not typically the way that you might, you know, uh, perceive your daily experience. So hopefully that will be interesting to you, and perhaps broaden and enlighten your horizons in various positive ways. Data is fundamental to atmospheric science, whether it be focused around weather or climate types of considerations, and so we will work with data throughout the course. And quite often, what this will cause us to do is build what are called scientific models that are informed by such elements as data and emphasize a systems perspective. So you can think of something like a hurricane as being an example of a weather system in the context of atmospheric science, and we'll quite often be breaking down such complex systems in terms of more simplified systems, and using models to try and represent those systems or aspects of those systems in various ways. And this will hopefully give us a better understanding as to what's going on from this perspective. I'll be sharing with you. Actually, I've called them. I should change the name here because I'm now calling them weather briefings, not weather reports. That's my semi-amusing way of referring to the weekly updates that I'll provide to you. So there we go. On a weekly basis, I'll probably be getting into the routine of doing this on Sundays, Saturday, Sundays over the weekend, so that you have the briefing in time for basically Monday morning. So we'll think of Monday as being the start of our week, and indeed, today is April the 29th, and we are literally just starting up the course on the first day of term. So I'll be sending out these weather briefings to you on a weekly basis that will identify the relevant content and so on. So let me give you an example of the first one of those. Again, Moodle's the place to go. Let's get rid of some of the other stuff here. So if we go to the course's Moodle site, once again, you can see there's an announcements area. If I click on announcements, you'll see that there is a weather briefing that was issued just today. And here's the content of that briefing. Apparently I didn't change the date here, so I think what I'll do is I'll actually, I can't change it right now because I'm in with my student view. I shall fix that. Normally I get the dates right, so it's correct up here at least. So this is the briefing for the week of April the 29th, and the intention here is to focus you on the learning outcomes that are relevant for this current week. So this overview that you're listening to now, plus some content on chapters 0 and 1, those are references relative to the second edition of the textbook, and some other great stuff to follow. Lab 1, which I said will highlight flooding, and then assignment 1, and we'll need to build up a little bit of additional content before I can make assignment 1 available to you. And then quizzes will follow too. A little bit more on those course elements momentarily. Okay, so that's what these weather briefings are. And this is again just a reminder, this is how critical this is. I share this again partly because a lot of students struggle with this. This is it's an online course, and the intention is that you can take the course wherever you are on the planet, literally. And I'll be traveling myself, I'm sure, at some point over the summer, and so I'll be delivering it from various locations. That part is evident. And the other part of it is that, of course, the course is delivered asynchronously. Um, I'll let me say more about that in just a second. So again, I share this with you more to just caution you in terms of the implied commitment, and also because for some of you, taking online courses may be perhaps a new experience completely, or it may be that you're taking a course um, such as this for the first time. So in terms of the evaluation scheme for the course, there'll be 3 assignments, and I'll say more about each of these elements just momentarily here. 5 quizzes, 4 labs. I'll talk about participation in a moment, and then we'll follow up with a final exam. I'm going to say this several times. The only requirement of you to be anywhere in person is for the final exam. Everything else is mediated or conducted online via Moodle. All right, so the assignments. There'll be 3 of them. Each of them is worth 5%. That'll give us a total of 15% for the entire course. We will do the assignments entirely online. I'll give you the material, the question paper online. We'll have an assignment-specific discussion forum through which I'll encourage you to ask questions to help you work through the assignment. On that matter of questions, the least effective questions are questions that are, to paraphrase, sound something like, "I don't get this question," or "What do you mean by this question?" It's very difficult for me to respond to something like that. More specific, thought out, detailed questions that give me a sense as to what you're thinking, what you've tried, etc., are much easier for me to respond to, and therefore for you to get helpful responses to as well. So the assignments will be mediated online. Quite often, students in this course will use various other means to help them work in groups informally to make their way through the assignments. Sometimes people meet in person if that's convenient. Quite often people will meet on campus, but there's no reason for you to do that. You can meet wherever you happen to be, coffee shops, etc., and so on. You're more than welcome to discuss aspects of the course using resources that are more comfortable and interesting to you, whether that be something like creating a Facebook group or having a WhatsApp group or what have you. It's really up to you. The only place where I will be participating actively will be in terms of the assignments forum available via Moodle. So you can ask your questions there, and I will be answering them there as well. There are going to be deadlines for these assignments, and there will be a penalty to incent you to submit your assignment in a timely fashion. Unfortunately, that's the way that we have to do things to keep everybody on track. I do make full solutions available at some time after the submission, so the assignments are intended to be a learning experience in that way as well. And note that the assignments are likely to include some degree of math. So typically what we're doing on the assignments are solving some kind of a problem that allows us to delve into both the content and skills related aspects of the course in some greater degree of detail. There'll be 5 quizzes throughout the summer. Your best 4 of your 5 quizzes automatically count. The quizzes are purely multiple choice questions. They are mediated via Moodle. I'll typically make them available for probably about 2 weeks. No math on the quizzes, all multiple choice questions, maybe some matching questions, that kind of thing. Probably expect about of order 30 questions per quiz, roughly speaking. Each quiz is worth 5%. And if you miss a quiz, the quiz becomes available for this. Basically, think of the quiz as being available during a window of opportunity, basically a time frame during which you can actually take the quiz. So there'll be a kind of a start date and an end date. The quiz will open and the quiz will close. And as I say, it'll be typically about 2 weeks. All you need to do during that 2-week window is to find about 30 to 45 minutes where you're able to take the quiz. You'll need a decent internet connection because once you start the quiz, you cannot pause it, you can't stop it and resume it or anything like that. You literally only get your one opportunity to take the quiz, so you need to be able to do it and just work through it in its entirety for 30 to 45 minutes. There aren't any makeups that are available for quizzes that you miss. If you miss just one quiz over the entire summer, then your best 4 will be the 4 that you completed. If you miss more than 4 quizzes, if you do not complete, if you miss more than one quiz, if you don't complete all 4 quizzes, then basically 5% per quiz missed gets added to your final exam. So the weight of your final exam increases in a proportional fashion. Labs. The labs tend to be slightly more practical ways of delving into the course material. You don't need to be on campus or anything like that to work through the labs. You'll have need at times to make use of perhaps commonly available items. In years gone by, I've had students cook rice, for example, to understand the concepts of saturation and humidity. We may do that one this summer, we'll see. But basically, the idea is that they're slightly more practically oriented. So over the course of the summer, there will be 4 of them. Each of them is worth 5%. So for a total of 20% of the overall assessment in the course. The labs are graded according to a pass-fail assessment scheme. So you basically have one of 3 outcomes as a consequence of as a results or an outcome on these labs. If you don't do the lab or you don't do it in a way that's deemed to be satisfactory, then your assessment will be not satisfactory and you won't get any marks. Satisfactory assessments will be awarded to any submission that meets the requirement for having completed about 75% of the lab successfully. And 75% of the lab successfully translates to a 75% grade, so you'd get a grade of 3.75 out of 5 on that. For those students who complete about 90% of the lab successfully, they'll be awarded an assessment grade of outstanding. So outstanding here is very positive. It doesn't mean that it's something that is incomplete. It means that the work you've done is of an excellent caliber. You get your full 5 marks on that. And as I say here, the labs are conducted on your own time at a convenient location. So again, like assignments, you'll be given a window of opportunity during which the labs will be made available to you, and then you will be expected to submit them by a certain deadline. Labs may also include some math. Sometimes very simple stuff, sometimes a little bit more involved. We'll see how that goes. Captured lectures. So as I've already shown you via the course's lecture site and hinted via the weekly updates in the form of weather briefings. Captured lectures are based primarily upon recordings that were done during the fall 2018 and winter 2019 terms. So you'll be able to review these at your own pace and at times that are convenient for you. And then I also provide you with links to the slides. The captured lectures also do include references to readings, and in fact, I should probably, while I'm thinking about it, just make the point here that textbook readings are also noted. And I will provide you with the readings relevant to both the first and second Canadian editions of the Ahrens, Jackson, and Jackson textbook, Meteorology Today. Well, participation, I think, is pretty important. You'll get more out of the course if you participate in it. And basically, if you do participate in the course, so this is an optional course element, but if you do participate, then you will potentially benefit by having the weight of the final exam reduced by as much as 5%. So basically the way that this works, if you look back at the assessment scheme, is you get the benefit of either participating fully, and so 5% of your overall assessment in the course is weighted on participation, and therefore your exam only counts for 40%. If you don't participate at all, or not much, then your participation grade is optional in the sense that it counts for nothing, and then you're basically putting all of your weight on the exam. How do I figure out participation? Basically, the participation will be based upon, for the most part, posts that you make to the Moodle forums. Okay, so and to also kind of encourage a better level of discourse to some degree, and this will be partially subjective based on my own assessment as well as that of the teaching assistants assigned to the course. The participation will also include, to some degree, an element of the quality of your posts to the forum. So again, to re-echo what I said before, if the sum total of your posts are posts along the lines of, I don't get question 3 on assignment X, I don't understand lab question 5, please explain, that's not going to get you a whole lot in the participation department. I would say that the best scores in participation will be obtained by those students who not only ask good questions, share interesting, relevant findings, but also those who answer the questions of their peers in the course. So I very much encourage you to think about that kind of a thing. The final exam. So this is the only component of the course that requires you to be physically present at a particular place at a particular time. Now, all I can tell you right now is that the course exam will be scheduled at some point during the regular SU19 examination period. And if you look at the dates that are relevant to the course, so this is also worth sharing. If we go back to the course's Moodle site and we go back to the main area of the course, open up the course outline. In the course outline, there is something on the dates that are relevant to the course. And here they are finally. So under university policies, it looks like in this printed updated version, it looks like it's on the lower half of page 7. Oh, that actually says enrollment date. Let's see where that goes to. Oh yeah, here we go. We are getting to the right area. So this is the website of the registrar's office. You're going to find out that that's actually quite important in the context of this course, as they are sending a lot of the Certainly, from a schedule perspective, they are in charge of driving the notion of schedule. So if we click on the summer session and notice that there are different columns that relate to the different terms, this is an SU course. It's the full summer term. S1 and S2 are shorter terms, as you can see, which means that our course start date is today, as we know. Course end date is basically the end of July, and then the exams follow soon after that. So all I can tell you right now about the exam in this course is that it will be a 3-hour exam scheduled somewhere in the July 31st to August 9th time frame. And we'll update you on that. So, what are the options available for taking the exam? Well, if you are if you're within 3 hours of campus, you're expected to show up in person at the Kiel campus during that time frame at the location that will be specified to take the exam. If you are more than 3 hours away from campus, so even if you're a student who lives in the Ottawa area, for example, because I've had that happen a bunch of times, and I visit Ottawa every so often to see my parents, so I know that it's it's one of those dicey ones. You could make it, but it may not work for you depending upon your other commitments. So even if you're as close as a place like that, what you can do is make arrangements to have the exam at an approved location. You'll probably, in a case like that, you'd be writing the exam on the same day and at the same time as the group that will be on the Kiel campus. Okay? If you want to do something like this, if you want to take the exam closer to where you're going to be for the summer because you live there and you're home for the summer, or you're looking at you've got a job that requires you to be in a certain location, we can accommodate you, but we need to know about it. So please send this. This is a case to send me email as soon as possible so that we can start making plans to accommodate you. So there is the ability to take exams off site. Now I know that some of you will be in much more possibly remote, interesting, far off places during the summer time frame. I quite often have students taking this course from places like India, places like China, Korea, and so on, literally around the planet, US, what have you. These may all be good cases for people making arrangements to take the exam locally. Basically, the way it works, you identify that you're interested in doing this, and then our office will essentially work with you to find an appropriate local place where the exam can be taken. If the time zone difference is substantial, so if you're in a place like Japan or China, Korea, India, you won't be writing the exam at the same time as the group back here in Toronto. You'll be writing it at a more convenient local hour, so you don't have to write the exam in the middle of the night or anything like that. But it will be close as possible to the day and time of the exam. So that's the way that will work. The exams themselves are broken into 3 parts: A, B, and C. Part A is purely multiple choice questions. The part B is a short answer question. I actually give you a diagram, a schematic that is relevant to some emphasis point or points within the course. And I ask you to memorize that and then reproduce that on the exam for 10 marks. And then in part C, you get to choose if you're comfortable with calculations and the kinds of things that we've been doing on the labs and the assignments. Then you can opt for that that style of a question on the exam. Whereas if that is definitely not your thing and you certainly don't want to go down that path, you can instead choose to write an essay. And I always have a choice of essay topics. I will post an example of a past exam as soon as somebody asks me to do so on the other forum. So we've already had some brave people step up and ask questions via the other forum, and I'm highly appreciative to them for breaking the ice. And what I would like to do is encourage that kind of interaction to continue. So I don't need multiple people to do this. I just really need one. So if somebody asks for samples of past exams via the other forum, I will comply and provide you with several examples. Finally, last point on this slide, as I mentioned before, the exam will be scheduled by the registrar's office and it will be held during the regular examination period. In basically the last day of July through to August the 9th is what we saw as being the relevant dates. And depending upon whether or not you are going for a participation credit, the exam will be worth 40 or 45%. Should have mentioned that when it comes to participation, it's a win-win proposition for you because I will actually calculate your grade both with and without participation. You'll get the better of the two automatically. You don't need to ask or request or identify or anything like that. Course grade, right. So the bottom line here is really all you need to know. Your grades, the grade that you earn in the course is exactly that. It is something that is earned. It's not given. So if you're looking for a very strong showing in the course, then I think you know what you need to do. You need to try and basically ensure that every element of the course you address with an intensity, with a desire to do really well on that. And again, I'm more than happy to help people before the fact try and figure out what that actually translates to in terms of expectations that the markers will be looking for. So this is a way of setting the stage to ensure that people aren't disappointed at the end. So again, double speed course. What are your expectations? Translate that into real work, and whatever you've got, whatever else you're trying to balance this summer. It might be another course, it might be a job, it might be family commitments, what have you. Make your plans early to ensure that you achieve in a way that you're hoping to achieve. Close that gap. Mentioned the textbook a number of times. It's an excellent textbook. It's actually based upon a book by the lead author, Donald Sierrans, that is in at least something like the 9th or so edition for the pure US version of the book. A couple of professors out on the West Coast at the University of Northern British Columbia, the Jacksons, teamed up with Aaron's, and there are now 2 Canadian editions of the textbook. And so basically it's the same excellent textbook with some Canadian specific content, which you'll see highlighted in the materials as well. So second edition is the go-to de facto reference edition. It's available from the bookstore. There are various ways of acquiring it, including a right-to-use online version, etc., and so on. I do use it extensively. I think you'll find that the material that's covered in the lectures and the readings are fairly well aligned. Obviously, because I'm the person delivering the course, I tend to emphasize some topics in more detail and perhaps gloss over or ignore other topics as for various reasons. I will do my best to keep you up to speed as well with the comparable readings in the first edition of the textbook. You're free to then acquire either of the Canadian editions, the first or the second edition. There are updates, but it's of a relatively minor nature, and I don't think that anybody with the first edition will be seriously disadvantaged. The US version of the textbook is significantly different. So it's really not recommended, and I will not provide required readings for any of the US versions of the textbook. As I say, it's an excellent textbook, and I continue to make extensive use of it. I've already introduced you to, my goodness, there I go again. They should be referred to as weather briefings. I must have changed the name at some point. I have taught the course for, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years in a row now. Typically I would teach a session during the summer that's completely online, and then a session during the fall winter. Because weather and climate has never been more important, because weather and climate are so dynamic these days, so much is changing, so much is going on. I can assure you that my enthusiasm for this material is nothing but on the increase. It's every single time I teach the course, I fully enjoy it. I change things sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in very significant ways. I quite often end up learning something myself. A couple of years ago, for example, perhaps it was even the last time I taught the course, we had a lot of wildfires in northern Alberta in the Fort McMurray area, and I decided to try and introduce content on wildfires into the regular material that I had, based the course upon, based upon the previous fall winter session. And I was completely amazed to realize how significant events like wildfires are in terms of impacting both weather and, believe it or not, climate. So it was a real game changer, and it resulted in a lot of new content. So some of which you may be exposed to. Okay, so yeah, I guess I've got another update that I was sloppy with in terms of making. So I'll just say that the weather briefings will be issued via Moodle before the start of each week. All right, that looks better. Very good. So that's really, in terms of keeping pace with the course, in terms of being guided towards what is relevant, and what you're supposed to be doing, even for people who perhaps miss part of the course for one reason or another. They joined the course late. They've been away on vacation or something and unable to stay connected. The weather briefings are really extremely important in terms of guiding you on a weekly basis through the specifics of the course. Math content, right? Well, like I say here, the science of the atmosphere, the science of Earth's atmosphere, is very much a topic that is data centric. Think about it. You've got a weather app on your phone. You have ways of perceiving weather, essentially the state of the atmosphere at a particular location at a particular time, as described by various observables like temperature, pressure, relative humidity, visibility, cloud cover, wind speed, direction, etc., and so on. There's a ton of data. And when you have data-rich subjects, such data-rich disciplines, let's call them, such as atmospheric science, it just lends itself to being a science, being a discipline that can be made extremely quantitative. And all those examples, if you use scientific instruments, right, those are all objectively quantifiable observables. Okay, so we may say it feels muggy today, it feels humid. That's more of a subjective assessment. And there is actually increasingly a place for subjective data in the sciences. It's something I've actually done some research on myself. The We'll mostly be focusing on more objective measures. So, data collected by various kinds of scientific instruments. So objective in that sense, instruments that have been calibrated and so on and so forth. So it's a very data rich area, and when you have disciplines that are rich in data, quite often what you want to do is to analyze that data. So there's a natural affinity to look at the discipline of atmospheric science from from a lens, from a perspective that is quantitative in nature. So what does this quantitative word mean? I mean, it could be as simple as looking at the data in terms of numbers in a table. Uh, so that's an expression of the quantitativeness, if you like. But we'll also look at quantitative aspects of the science that are expressed by taking data and making graphical representations of it, for example. And sometimes our way of looking at the science will be, I want to say, semi-quantitative in nature, or somewhere between something that's very obviously, very clearly quantitative, like something numerical, numbers, and something that's a little bit more descriptive, something more qualitative. So I'll introduce you to these things called process flow diagrams, which are a great way of deconstructing complex systems into the individual parts, so we can figure out what those parts are, how they fit together, how they work together. And we'll have some examples of that, I'm sure, very soon in the course. And that's an example of something that is somewhere in between a way of looking at the science from a perspective that's completely quantitative to a perspective that's completely qualitative. So we'll have an opportunity to kind of look at quite a spectrum here. Roughly speaking, your exposure to math at about a grade 10 level is what is assumed. You'll be working with simple formulae. You'll be your ability to work with scientific notation will be of value. That's probably one of the harder things that you'll have to do, actually. But we'll have some opportunity here. So the most important thing for you to keep in mind, because I'm not trying to scare you away from the course, not yet, is that the quantitative elements are basically, they're only required elements at your own choosing, right? Well, I mean, you have to do the assignments in the labs, but at least when you do the assignments in the labs and you're trying to work through the quantitative stuff, you can ask me questions, you can work with your peers, you can use internet resources and so on and so forth. No quantitative stuff on the quizzes, and on the final exam, you get to choose to do a quantitative question or completely ignore it. Okay? So, there is the math element, but again, it's something that we give you a lot of choice on, so and then support. So I hope that that will make it easier for you to handle. The remainder of the course outline, which is essentially what I've been going through in this overview material here, looks at various policies, including how we handle questions and concerns. Unfortunately, there are no class reps. The class representative program, which I'll allude to, or provide a little bit more detail on in a moment, that program's not running this summer, unfortunately. So people will just need to raise concerns, with me first, I hope, as they arise. And you're certainly more than welcome to do that in a group format if that serves your purposes better. I mentioned the Moodle forums. I've mentioned that it will be clear on every assignment and all the term work, every assignment, every lab, the quizzes, and so on, what the acceptable timeframes are, and what the penalties are. There's some material in the course outline on what you can do if you feel that anything that's been graded has not been graded appropriately. I do want to emphasize that the teaching assistants that will be assessing your work, both the term work and the exam, they're graduate students, so students have already completed an undergraduate degree in a related field, a field related to weather and or climate, and so they are very familiar with the subject area, and as a consequence should be able to assess your work in a very appropriate way. So it's not usually a typically an area of problem. And I've talked about the quizzes. If what happens if you miss a quiz. The exam, obviously a final exam, it's a serious thing, but things happen. People get sick, that kind of thing. So there are university policies in play to handle scenarios like that. As I mentioned, there is a class representative program. Unfortunately, it's not available in the summer session, so people will need to advocate for themselves or self-organize into groups and share their thoughts as necessary. You do need to be familiar with the notions of copyright and intellectual property, meaning basically that you can't take someone else's work that you get over the internet, you get through some other means, and represent it as your own, and that there could be both legal as well as academic consequences to this. That also relates, of course, to the university's principles around academic honesty and integrity. The principles that you are really need to make sure that you're familiar with, because ignorance is not going to serve you in terms of lines of defense. So make sure you're aware of that. And the university usually goes to pretty significant lengths to make sure that students are aware of what I'm speaking about there. We've already talked about the sessional dates that are established by the registrar's office for this course, but not only this course, all of the courses that are taught through the university. There's a formal policy on academic accommodation and for students with whether it be purely academic or through if there's some disability involved. That's another area that if you do have any considerations there, perhaps you have a letter that from one of York's centers, then that's something you should also advise me of as soon as possible. Please do not wait. It's possible that the exam is scheduled to conflict with perhaps some kind of an observed religious event, religious period or time of observation, and so the university has a policy around that as well, and that is something that is, it is the kind of thing that happens routinely enough that there is a policy around that. You should be aware of what's expected in terms of your conduct in academic situations, and that applies to behavior on Moodle. There is a formal policy on disruptive behavior, and hopefully, and you'll get some feel for that as the in-class group is sometimes a bit of a challenge to rein in. Let's just leave it at that. Don't expect weather emergencies to be a factor, but you never know. But the university does have a policy on weather emergencies as well. That's that disruptive behavior policy, and it doesn't just apply to in-class situations or exam situations. It applies to the online mediated learning, such as via Moodle. There are other support resources that I am also very, I need to tell you that they're not available during the summer. So for various reasons, the group a lot of these are volunteer led, and the people that are involved are there's basically a changing of the organization, and they've decided that they're just not in a position to deliver these services over the summer. So um, some of them are more in-person oriented anyway, so of limited value to perhaps a lot of you, particularly if you're somewhere other than the Kiel campus. So the loss is perhaps not quite as extreme as it might see. I'll see if there's anything I can do to help with drawing in peer tutors and so on during the summer. The course outline also speaks about other resources that are university wide. Uh, some of these could be extremely valuable to you depending upon your situation. They cover a lot of different topics from wellness to wellness and mental health to personal safety to teaching to learning and learning styles and so on. So um, my purpose in kind of just glossing over them here is to let you know that there's much more detail available in the course outline, and there are links provided in the course outline to direct you to additional resources that will provide you with more of a framing of the details of the service. And I think with that, like the Arcade Fire song, we're ready to start. So with that, I'll wrap up this lecture. It's gone for about an hour, um, and been focused on introducing you to the NATS 1780, a Weather and Climate Summer 2019 edition. I certainly look forward to uh, in engaging in this learning experience with you, and I look forward to your input. And with that, I will conclude the recording of this lecture.